"We've been thinking about the Europe trip," my mother said, her voice hesitant on the phone. "We're so grateful, but we were wondering if it would be okay if Catherine came instead of you." Time seemed to freeze as her words registered. 3 months of meticulous planning, $24,000 in non-refundable reservations, countless hours coordinating with luxury hotels and Michelin-starred restaurants, all for my parents' 40th anniversary gift. A once-in-a-lifetime experience I'd specifically designed to share with them, to finally have real time together after years of them canceling plans and prioritizing my sister. And now they were replacing me on my own trip, with Catherine, my 32-year-old sister who hadn't held a job longer than 6 months, who still lived in their basement, and who had spent the past decade perfecting the art of manipulating our parents. I gripped my phone tighter, staring out the window of my corner office at the Manhattan skyline. "She's going through a really rough time since the breakup," my mother continued, filling the silence. "We think this could really help her reconnect with herself." I closed my eyes and took a measured breath. "I'll make the arrangements," I said finally, my voice perfectly even. What my mother couldn't see was that I'd already opened my laptop and begun creating a new folder titled Plan B. My parents had made their choice. Again, now I would make mine. My name is Michael Bennett, 36 years old, senior partner at Ridgeway Capital, one of the most prestigious investment firms in New York. I specialize in emerging technology portfolios, managing over $1.2 billion in client assets. I've built this career through discipline, strategic thinking, and an almost supernatural ability to predict market shifts before they happen. My personal investment returns have consistently outperformed market averages by 32%, and my client retention rate is the highest in the firm. In the hyper-competitive world of Manhattan finance, I've carved out a reputation as the steady hand you want guiding your money through turbulent markets. What most of my colleagues don't know is that this same analytical, methodical approach extends to my personal life. I track patterns, anticipate outcomes, and make decisions based on data rather than emotion. Skills I developed growing up in a household dominated by my sister's constant dramas and my parents' endless accommodation of them. Catherine was diagnosed with ADHD and anxiety as a teenager, legitimate conditions that unfortunately became her all-purpose excuse for everything from incomplete homework to losing jobs to failed relationships. By the time she reached adulthood, the pattern was set. Catherine creates crisis, parents rush to rescue, Michael adjusts his expectations accordingly. For years, I accepted this dynamic. I understood my sister struggled in ways I didn't. I built my life independently, rarely asking for help or attention. I paid my own way through Northwestern, secured my own internships, built my own network. When I moved to New York 12 years ago, I told myself the distance would help reset family patterns. Perhaps with me gone, Catherine would finally step up. Instead, the opposite happened. Without me there to serve as the family's stability anchor, Catherine regressed further. She moved back home temporarily after college. That temporary stay had now lasted 9 years. She cycled through jobs, retail, administrative work, half-hearted attempts at creative careers, never lasting more than a few months before quitting or getting fired, always with a dramatic story about toxic environments or unappreciative bosses. Meanwhile, I advanced in my career, bought a luxury condo overlooking Central Park, and built a life of discipline and achievement. I visited home twice a year, calls once a week, sent thoughtful gifts on birthdays and holidays. I maintained the relationship as best I could, even as it became increasingly clear that my family operated better in my absence, with Catherine as the perpetual center of attention and concern. The Europe trip was supposed to change that dynamic. My parents had never traveled internationally. My father's job as a high school principal and my mother's work as a nurse had provided a comfortable life but little room for luxury. Their 40th anniversary seemed the perfect opportunity to give them something extraordinary, a meticulously planned week visiting Paris, Venice, and the Amalfi Coast, staying at five-star hotels, dining at restaurants they'd only seen on travel. Shows? We'll be with Michael, my mother had gushed when I first presented them with the itinerary over Christmas. He speaks French, you know, she'd told my aunts proudly, as if this were a new discovery rather than something I'd studied diligently for years. For 3 months, I'd worked with a high-end travel consultant to craft the perfect experience. I'd arranged for a private tour of the Louvre before opening hours, secured dinner reservations at Le Jules Verne in the Eiffel Tower, booked a private gondola tour in Venice with a tenor to serenade them, reserved a cliffside villa on the Amalfi Coast with a personal chef. The trip represented not just a significant financial investment, but an emotional one, a chance to reconnect with my parents as an adult, away from the established patterns of our family dynamic. And now, with 6 weeks until departure, they were asking if Catherine could take my place. I maintained my composure throughout the rest of the call, asking practical questions about Catherine's passport status, expired naturally. Whether she had appropriate attire for the restaurants I'd booked, she didn't. If she'd be able to handle the extensive walking tours I'd arranged, questionable. Through it all, my mother's relief at my apparent acceptance was palpable. "You're always so understanding, Michael," she said before hanging up. "Catherine's just more fragile than you. You've always been our rock." After ending the call, I sat motionless at my desk, processing both the situation and my response to it. A junior analyst would have seen this coming, I thought bitterly. The patterns were clear, the data consistent. Catherine had ended things with her latest boyfriend 3 weeks ago, a relationship that had lasted all of 4 months, but that she'd described as possibly the one. The subsequent emotional tailspin was entirely predictable, as was my parents' response. What wasn't predictable was what I would do next. My initial impulse, cancelling the entire trip, lasted approximately 30 seconds. That would be an emotional reaction, not a strategic one. It would hurt my parents, accomplish nothing, and ultimately reinforce the narrative that Catherine needed their support while I was fine on my own. Instead, I began to examine the situation, as I would a complex investment strategy. What were the actual objectives? What outcomes would represent success? What leverage did I have? What patterns needed disruption? By the time I left the office that evening, I had the outlines of a plan. This situation presented an opportunity, not just to address this specific disappointment, but to recalibrate the entire family dynamic. It wouldn't be quick or simple, but neither was building a successful investment portfolio. Both required patience, strategic thinking, and a willingness to make bold moves when necessary. The next morning, I called the travel consultant who had helped arrange the original trip. "Sophia, I need to make some changes," I explained, outlining the situation with clinical detachment. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice filled with the genuine empathy of someone who regularly managed wealthy clients' complex personal lives. "What would you like to do? Cancel? Reschedule for another time?" "Neither," I replied. "I want to proceed with the trip as planned, but with a few modifications. My sister will be going in my place. I need you to arrange appropriate accommodations for that change." "Of course," Sophia said, already typing notes. "We can update the reservations with her name. Will there be any other changes to the itinerary?" "Yes," I said, my plan crystallizing as I spoke. "I want to add a shadow trip." "A shadow trip?" she asked, confusion evident in her voice. "I'll be in the same cities, at the same times, but staying at different hotels, dining at different restaurants. They won't know I'm there." There was a pause before Sophia responded. "That's unusual, but certainly doable." "May I ask why?" "Let's call it a social experiment," I said, not wanting to elaborate on the complex family dynamics at play. "I'd also like you to arrange for a photographer to discreetly document their trip, someone who can blend in as a tourist but capture key moments." "Like a private paparazzi?" Sophia sounded both intrigued and hesitant. "Exactly. Professional, discreet, and comprehensive. I want daily reports and photographs. By the end of our call, Sophia had a clear understanding of what I wanted. A parallel trip that would allow me to be in proximity to my family without their knowledge, with documentation of their experience. The next step was managing my parents' expectations. I called my mother that evening, my voice carefully calibrated to convey supportive resignation. "I've made the arrangements for Catherine," I said. "The travel agency will be contacting her directly to handle passport renewal expediting. They'll also be sending a clothing stipend for appropriate attire. That's part of the package I purchased." "Oh, Michael, that's so thoughtful," my mother gushed. "Catherine's so excited. She's already looking up things to do in Paris." I bit back the obvious response, that Catherine could have looked up Parisian attractions at any point in her 32 years if she'd had genuine interest. Instead, I maintained my supportive facade. "There's one condition," I said, introducing the first constraint in my plan. "No itinerary changes. The schedule was carefully designed with specific reservations and experiences." "Catherine will need to adhere to it exactly." "Of course," my mother agreed quickly. "We'll make sure everything goes according to your plans." I nearly laughed at the irony of her statement. Over the next month, I received regular updates from Sophia as she arranged both trips, the original one for my parents and Catherine, and my shadow version. She secured me accommodations at alternate luxury hotels in each city, typically within a 10-minute walk of my family's locations. She arranged for the photographer, a former photojournalist named Elise, who typically worked celebrity events and was accustomed to being invisible while capturing authentic moments. Meanwhile, I maintained regular contact with my parents, expressing enthusiasm about their upcoming trip and offering helpful suggestions about packing and travel logistics. I sent Catherine an expensive set of luggage as a pre-trip gift, ostensibly to ensure she was properly equipped, but also containing a discreetly embedded GPS tracker. Low-tech, but effective. 2 days before their departure, I called my father. Deliberately, when I knew my mother would be at her book club. "Dad, how are you feeling about the trip?" I asked. "Excited," he said, though I detected a note of tension in his voice. "A bit nervous about the travel, but looking forward to it." "And how's Catherine handling the preparations?" A hesitation. "She's, you know Catherine, a bit scattered. Had a meltdown yesterday about not having the right shoes for Venice. Your mother took her shopping. I absorbed this information, then moved to the real purpose of my call. Dad, I want to ask you something directly, and I'd appreciate an honest answer." "Of course," he said, wariness evident in his tone. "Whose idea was it really for Catherine to go instead of me?" The silence that followed told me everything before he even spoke. "Catherine was having a hard time after the breakup," he finally said. "She saw the itinerary on our counter and got emotional about never getting to experience something like that. Your mother thought it might be good for her self-esteem. So Catherine suggested the switch," I clarified. Another uncomfortable pause. "She didn't directly ask, but she was so upset. You know how she gets, Michael, and you're always so capable, so understanding." "I see," I said, keeping my voice neutral despite the confirmation of exactly what I'd suspected. "Thank you for being honest." "You're not upset, are you?" my father asked, concern finally breaking through. "We thought you'd already gotten the joy from planning it, and you're so busy with work." "No, I'm not upset," I said. And in that moment, it was true. I wasn't upset, I was resolute. "Enjoy the trip, Dad. Take lots of pictures." As I hung up, I felt a strange sense of calm. The final piece had fallen into place. This wasn't a simple case of my parents making a difficult choice. This was Catherine manipulating them, as she had countless times before, and them taking the path of least resistance. The pattern was so established that none of them even recognized it anymore. My plan was no longer just about disrupting a pattern, it was about exposing it. The day of their departure arrived. My parents and Catherine boarded their business class. Flight to Paris, another detail I'd specifically arranged. Not first class, which would have been overwhelming for them, but the perfect introduction to luxury travel. Meanwhile, I left my office early, returning to my apartment to pack for my own journey, scheduled to depart 6 hours after theirs. By the time I landed at Charles de Gaulle Airport, my family was already settled in their suite at Le Bristol. Paris. Elise, the photographer, sent her first report. They'd arrived safely. Catherine had already had a minor meltdown about the room configuration, despite it being exactly as specified, and they were currently resting before their evening dinner reservation. I checked into Le Meurice, just a 10-minute walk away, and prepared for my parallel experience to begin. For the next 7 days, I lived a strange double life, experiencing the same cities as my family, but from a different perspective. Each morning, I received Elise's report and photographs from the previous day. My parents looking overwhelmed but happy at dinner in the Eiffel Tower. Catherine posting incessantly on social media about her luxury trip. My father's face as he saw Venice from the water for the first time. My mother tearing up at the private concert I'd arranged in a small Venetian church. Through it all, I maintained a careful distance, occasionally glimpsing them from across a plaza or through the window of a cafe, but never close enough to be noticed. It was like watching a film where I knew all the characters intimately, but couldn't interact with them. What became increasingly clear through Elise's documentation was the emerging pattern in their experience. The first 2 days, everything proceeded according to plan. My parents marveled at the experiences I'd arranged. Catherine performed appropriately for someone grateful for an unexpected luxury experience. By day 3, in Venice, the pattern shifted. Catherine began complaining about the scheduled activities. The private art tour was boring. The restaurant I'd selected was too stuffy. She wanted to shop instead of visiting the historical sites I'd arranged. My parents, true to form, began accommodating her, skipping a gondola ride I'd spent months arranging to instead accompany Catherine to designer stores along the canals. By the time they reached the Amalfi Coast, they had largely abandoned my carefully crafted itinerary. The private cooking class, cancelled. The chartered boat tour, shortened to accommodate Catherine's sudden seasickness. The historical walking tour, replaced with pool time at the hotel. I watched all of this unfold through Elise's daily reports, feeling not anger but a strange sense of validation. The pattern was performing exactly as predicted, providing perfect documentation of the dynamic I'd experienced my entire life. On their final night in Italy, I made my move. Their last dinner was scheduled at a breathtaking cliffside restaurant in Positano, with a private terrace overlooking the Mediterranean. I'd arranged for the chef to prepare a special anniversary menu featuring recreations of dishes from my parents' wedding. I arrived at the restaurant an hour before their reservation, speaking with the manager to make a slight adjustment to the evening's plan. Then I took a seat at the bar, positioned to observe their table without being immediately visible. They arrived precisely on time, a credit to my father's punctuality rather than any respect for the reservation. My mother looked elegant in a new dress, my father uncomfortable but distinguished in the tailored suit I'd arranged to have waiting in their hotel room. Catherine, predictably, had underdressed despite the clothing stipend, wearing something more appropriate for a beach club than a fine dining establishment. The maitre d' seated them at the specially prepared terrace table, where the sun was just beginning to set over the Mediterranean. I watched as they were presented with champagne, Dom Perignon, my father's favorite after I'd introduced him to it years ago, and as the waiter explained the special anniversary menu. My mother's hands flew to her face in surprise when the first course arrived, a modern interpretation of the soup they'd served at their wedding reception. My father reached for her hand across the table, a gesture so uncharacteristically public that I knew he was genuinely moved. Catherine, meanwhile, was already looking at her phone, barely acknowledging the significance of the moment. I waited until they were midway through their main course before nodding to the manager. As planned, he approached their table with a bottle of rare Italian wine I'd selected months earlier. "With compliments from Mr. Bennett," he said, presenting the bottle to my father. Confusion crossed my father's face. "There must be a mistake. I didn't order this." "Not you, sir," the manager clarified with a smile. "Mr. Michael Bennett. He specifically requested this wine be served with your anniversary dinner." I chose that moment to stand from my place at the bar and walk toward their table. The expressions that crossed their faces as they saw me approach were worth every euro I'd spent on this elaborate plan. My mother's shock, my father's confusion, and Catherine's face drained of color, her eyes darting between our parents as if calculating how to spin this unexpected development. "Surprise," I said simply, stopping at their table. "Happy anniversary." "Michael," my mother half stood, her voice barely above a whisper. "How are you here?" "I've been here all along," I replied calmly. "In Paris, in Venice, and now here. I've been having my own European vacation, just without you." The silence that followed was profound. Around us, other diners continued their meals, oblivious to the family drama unfolding on our private terrace. "May I join you?" I asked, gesturing to the empty fourth chair that I'd asked the restaurant to leave at the table. My father nodded wordlessly, still processing my appearance. As I sat, the waiter appeared with a glass for me, pouring from the special wine I'd brought. I raised it slightly. "To 40 years, I said, looking at my parents. "And to patterns that can be broken when we choose to see them clearly." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "Michael, we never meant to hurt you." "I know," I said, "and I meant it. You never do. But intent doesn't change impact." Over the next hour, as we continued through the anniversary dinner I'd planned, I calmly explained everything. My shadow trip, the photographer documenting their experience. Though I didn't reveal the GPS tracker, some details were better left private. And most importantly, the patterns I'd observed not just during this trip, but throughout our family history. "Catherine has needs," my mother began defensively, falling into the familiar script. "Everyone has needs," I countered gently. "Including me. Including you and Dad. The question is whether we're creating systems that address everyone's needs or just responding to whoever creates the most drama." Catherine remained uncharacteristically silent throughout this conversation, her eyes focused on her plate. "We thought you didn't mind," my father said finally. "You've always been so self-sufficient," I finished for him. "I became that way because I had to, not because I wanted to be excluded from the family." As the dinner concluded with the special dessert I'd arranged, a recreation of my parents' wedding cake, I presented them with a leather-bound album. "This contains photographs from your actual trip," I explained. "Not the one I planned, but the one you experienced. I thought you might want to see yourselves as I've seen you, from a distance, making choices that unintentionally exclude me time after time." My mother began to cry in earnest then, finally understanding the magnitude of what had happened. My father, ever the educator, looked through the album methodically, his expression growing more troubled with each page. Catherine finally spoke, her voice uncharacteristically small. "You went to all this trouble just to make us feel guilty?" Shook my head. "No. I went to all this trouble to make visible what has been invisible to all of you. This isn't about guilt. It's about awareness and choice." As we parted that evening, they to their hotel, me to mine, I felt not vindication but a strange sense of peace. For the first time, I had refused to simply accept my assigned role in the family dynamic. I had neither exploded in anger nor retreated in quiet hurt. Instead, I had methodically documented the pattern and presented it clearly for all to see. The flight home the next day was quiet, all four of us together in business class. My mother kept reaching for my hand at random intervals, as if to confirm I was really there. My father engaged me in conversation about my work, asking questions he'd never bothered to ask before. Catherine alternated between sullen silence and tearful apologies that seemed at least partially genuine. 6 months have passed since the Europe trip. The changes in our family dynamic haven't been dramatic or immediate, but they've been real. My parents now call me regularly, not just when they need something or when guilt prompts them to check in. They've started setting clearer boundaries, with Catherine including a timeline for her to find her own apartment. Catherine, surprisingly, has responded to these changes by actually stepping up. She's held the same administrative job for 5 months now, a personal record. She still has drama, still needs more support than most 32-year-olds. But the family system no longer revolves exclusively around her needs. As for me, I've learned that disrupting unhealthy patterns requires more than just strategic planning and documentation. It also requires a willingness to be vulnerable, to name your needs directly, rather than waiting for others to notice them. Last week, I invited my parents to New York for Thanksgiving. Just them, not Catherine. For once, they accepted without hesitation or negotiation. We'll see if they actually come without her, but the fact that they agreed represents progress. I gave my parents a luxurious 1-week trip to Europe with me, but they took my jobless sister instead. What they didn't realize was that by making that choice, they set in motion a series of events that would ultimately transform our family dynamic more thoroughly than any luxury vacation could have done on its own. Sometimes the greatest gift isn't the experience you plan, but the truth you finally make impossible to ignore.